Hi, this is Tom Needham, and you are listening to the sounds of film. And I am so excited to have on the show today two directors, Jeff Zimbalist and Maria Bukonina. They're directors of Skywalkers, A Love Story. This film is going to be screening at Guild Hall in East Hampton on Friday, July 5th at 7 p.m. It's part of their documentary summer series. And the film Skywalkers, A Love Story is incredible. It's a part romance, part thriller. The film follows a daredevil couple as they take their relationship to terrifying new heights in a wild scheme to climb the world's last great skyscraper. Jeff, Maria, thank you so much for joining me today on the Sounds of Film.
Our pleasure. Thank you, Tom.
So, man, I think people are going to absolutely love this film. I know I did. What inspired the two of you to want to make this film in the first place? And maybe you can kind of explain to the audience a little bit of the background.
Yeah, this is Jeff. I was a amateur but passionate rooftopper in my teens and 20s, which meant that I trespassed onto the highest buildings in my city and tried to escape sort of the prescribed destinations and behaviors of the city, and sort of define for myself on my own terms my relationship to fear and who I wanted to be in the world. And I found it, transcendent, and spiritual and really helpful in my development. But I did not know that this activity had a name. We just called it trespassing. And then as I became a journalist and realized that people were doing this all over the world and they were trespassing onto buildings way higher and doing way more extreme things and making beautiful art on the top, and that it was called rooftopping, I started tracking the rise of this phenomena and looking for a story that resonated as deeply as my experience had. Flash forward roughly 15 years, and Angela Nicolau burst on the scene, first female rooftopper to get any kind of serious attention. And she was a trained gymnast and acrobat, and was saying, "Well, I don't want to compete with the guys. I want to do this my own way and bring a feminine lens to it." And so I reached out to her, and she said she was raised in a traveling circus in Russia. And I was like, "Well, that's even more compelling." And then she introduced me to Vanya, who was at the time, it was around 2015, the biggest, most popular rooftopper in Russia, and they presented each other as sort of rivals or competitors, but you could sense that there was a budding sort of courtship and underneath it, underneath the surface. And that was where this seed got planted of, oh my God, could we tell a love story on top of the world and use extreme climbing as a metaphor for romantic trust? We put together a little sizzle reel that showed what the vision was for the movie, and had some old friends at a company called XYZ and another called Library take the leap of faith to come on and independently finance the project, which allowed us to hire a crew, including Maria Bukanina, who is Russian American and was able to be in Russia with our Skywalkers during the pandemic and during the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and travel and live with them throughout Asia. And the film took many twists and turns. It was sometimes saying to us, this wants to be a heist. Other times it was saying, this wants to be a thriller. But we stuck true to that initial sort of North Star, that vision of this being a love story, and just kept reminding ourselves in production and in post that we don't just want this to be a film about the fear of falling from heights, but much more so, we want this to be a film about the fear of falling in love.
Can either of you elaborate a little bit about the metaphorical connection between extreme climbing and romance?
Yeah, I mean, I think love is dangerous, right? It breaks our hearts, it crushes our spirits, it destroys our self-esteem. And here in this case, that danger is material. If these guys don't trust each other, it's life or death stakes. And so I think it's framing the essential element, the essential adhesive, that's universal in romantic relationships, which is trust. It's framing that in more extreme terms so that we don't undervalue or overlook how central that is. That you got to wake up every day and choose to trust your partner.
Do you want to add anything to that, Maria?
We might have lost her. I don't see her on the call here
I
anymore.
think she did drop a second ago. She might be trying to join back, Melissa. I'm not sure, but Tom, if you wanted to keep
Okay,
going
I'll keep on
solo
going.
for right now.
Sure. So I got the sense, Jeff, that when you were describing what it's like to do this stuff, you wanted to make it clear that this is not just doing stunts and thrills, that there's a deeper meaning to it. I think you even used the word spiritual. Can you explain how this act of going on top of buildings and climbing and doing art is also a spiritual act?
Yeah, there's, at the time I started, I was in college and I was in theory programs and, reading theorists like Frederick Jameson and Adorno, and they sort of define these cities that we live in as these culture bubbles. And while we may feel like we have agency and we're making choices for ourselves, in fact, these theorists would say you're inundated with messaging and advertising and persuasion everywhere all day. And that bombardment sort of gives us the impression, the illusion that we're making choices for ourselves, but really we're just choosing between pre-prescribed options. And when you escape that and you find these autonomous spaces that haven't been predefined, then you really do feel that autonomy. You feel like you are independent of those influences, and there's a thrill to that. And it's more than just, the physical adrenaline of will I get away with this. It's this idea that I am making up my own mind. I'm making these decisions, facing my fears, figuring out who I want to be on my own terms, and continuing to be creative in that space, underneath the city or on top of the city, in these nooks and crannies is an incredible inspiration. And for Ivan and Angela, they've been able to turn it into a career. And, their inspirations um, are not the Kardashians. They're like Basquiat and Warhol, and Angela's parents being trapeze artists, and she refers to their rooftopping activity as the modern day circus, traveling from one destination to the other. So there's an existential substance that's working under the surface here, even when you do it alone. And then you add this new element, which is that they're doing it together, and each climb is a test of their trust and commitment to each other. And we watch that tug of war throughout the film. Like, who's pushing them further into the sky, who's bringing them back to the earth and keeping them safe. How do they negotiate their fears and the panic attacks that we see them going through? And we were looking for the universal in that throughout this process.
This must have been an incredible film to actually make. Can you elaborate a little bit about how the two of you were able to get this footage? Is it all footage that they just shared with you that they took when they were up there, or did you follow them in particular cases? It's unbelievable, the footage in this film.
Maria?
Yes, it's a combination of both. So when we started the project, they already had been traveling for years, so they were able to pass over to us over 60 hours of their archival footage of their own. So when you see them being young and traveling together, all that is something they shot together. Then after we started the project, we realized that there had been an earlier short documentary that a Dutch film crew was doing a few years before we started, and they were able to capture the actual meeting for the first time. When you see young Ivan and Angela on the train and kind of getting to know each other, that's all actual footage that we were super happy to discover that that was covered by someone else. And then we, of course, joined them for several years on the road. We filmed about 200 hours of cinema verite of our own with them. And then what we agreed to do with them was we would cover their life on the ground, so to say, and then we would follow them to the first level, to lower rooftops. But then once they were going to the more dangerous extremes of the on high altitudes, such as spires and cranes and ledges, they would be filming themselves. We wanted to make sure they weren't doing anything for camera; they would do otherwise just for themselves. And B, of course, it's a safety concern for them and the crew. We didn't want to distract them. We didn't want to put our crew in danger. So we developed this pretty, elaborate hazard protocol, safety protocol to make sure that we're all staying safe as we're doing this. So they were collecting their own footage as well as we were collecting footage of them. We had about 9 different cameras going, everything from GoPros to night vision cam, which is what allowed them to film a lot of that footage in Merdeka in complete darkness. They were using a drone. Ivan flies his own drone as he's lifting and gala on top of Merdeka. They use sometimes their cell phones when there's no other gear you can show, like in elevators when we're trying to sneak into the buildings and we need to go past security. You have to hide all the cameras, and then she would just film with her iPhone. So there was a variety of gear, and that's how we're able to collect such a minute-to-minute coverage of everything that happened.
There is a shot in the film, I presume that was taken by someone else, of someone else who did this kind of climbing, and they fell. And I was wondering if you had other footage like that. How did you make the decision about whether to include that or not, or whether to include other footage of that sort?
Right. Yeah, there are a number of videos on YouTube of rooftoppers falling, many to their death, some of which went viral, some of which have been taken down because they're too disturbing to watch. We debated long and hard about how much of that to include. We knew we wanted to include some of it, mostly to say, to anyone who thought that this might look easy, the way that Ivan and Angela, as trained gymnasts who've been doing it for many years, the way any professional in any extreme sport makes their sport look easy. This is a way of saying really early in the film, this isn't easy. This is incredibly dangerous. We even have a warning up at the top of the film to avoid people copycatting. And then, of course, by the end of the film, we feel it's incredibly clear that this is really taxing and grueling and specialized work, and that I don't believe anybody would come away after watching the whole film feeling like, that's easy, I'll go up there and do that. And we're really important to us that we don't encourage people to try this at home. So we included two of these tragic falls, and it's during a scene where a young Angela is just starting to understand her threshold for fear and for risk. And she sees these videos for the first time, and they impact her. They make her feel sick, and she has to figure out what her edge is, so to speak. How far does she want to push herself?
Did you have any contingency in terms of this film if, God forbid, something had happened to the two of them when you were filming?
Yeah, well, there was. Well, first of all, I want to say that Ivan and Angela are very much different than your average extreme athlete who says they've come to terms with death or they're okay with dying doing what they love. Ivan and Angela don't want to die, and they said that since the beginning. They're wrestling with their fear in most of the scenes in the film. Angela has a panic attack at one point on a roof, and that was what compelled us towards them. Is that this is an extraordinary life that's difficult to relate to, but when they're experiencing fear like the rest of us, it's easier to identify with that. That feels universal. I have that fear too watching them, and so sometimes they do pull themselves back, and there are much more daredevil, adrenaline driven rooftoppers out there whose instincts I wouldn't trust. And coming into this, we do trust Ivan and Angela to a certain extent. It was incredibly collaborative. Often, when we said we don't feel comfortable with that, pull back, they would listen to us. And so I think our influence, if anything, made them more conservative and more cautious. We were always saying it does not matter if at the end of this film you complete the big climb or not. What matters is if you choose to trust each other. And that's where the real dramatic suspense is for us in this film. So we tried to do our best to discourage them putting their life on the line. That said, it was always a risk, and it was always a conversation. Do not do anything consciously, and please try not to subconsciously do anything that you wouldn't do otherwise for the cameras. In terms of them getting arrested, we did have conversations with the right people in these locations to do everything that we could to help them get out of that situation. And usually felt like we had a good opportunity to help them if something were to go wrong. So luckily, there was only one fall over the course of this production, and we ended up with all of the elements that they wanted and the elements that we wanted, and we're really grateful.
Jeff, you mentioned that they're different from other rooftoppers. I guess personality wise, how are they different exactly, other than what you already said? Like, can you tell me a little bit about other rooftoppers and what they're like?
Yeah, there's a yeah, I'm not going to generalize across all rooftoppers because this phenomena now spans many territories of the world and all sorts of people of different ages who have a diverse range of motivations for doing it. I think the type of rooftopper that we are most that I find it most difficult to identify with are those that are doing these incredibly dangerous hangs and shock value poses for likes on social media. And the artistry of it, the storytelling of it, the photography of it is an afterthought at most. Ivan and Angela stopped doing hangs. That was something that they felt just wasn't justified in their risk benefit analysis. And they really do think of themselves as imaginative creators. They come from these traditions, like I mentioned earlier, of sophisticated artists. They talk about Basquiat's work before they go off and shoot, versus saying, what kind of shock value post is going to get me more likes. So I think that's a huge distinction. That said, they do have to prove that over and over again. There is a stigma around influencers, and they're constantly trying to send the message that what they're doing is an art form, and they're trying to push it forward as such.
Maria, were there any particularly surprising or pivotal moments during the filming that actually significantly shaped the final cut of the film?
We kind of were relying on Ivan as a leader in terms of deciding when to go and how to go about it and how to get into the building, because he's the one responsible usually for their party to get in. So when Ivan discovered this genius idea that the World Cup was happening and they should go at the final match day, that was a cool, it was cool to watch him come up with that in real time, in real life. He did walk around the city and just kind of, because he's a huge soccer fan actually himself. So he was really, he said, I've never missed a World Cup in my life since I was a kid. I always watch with my dad, but this is the one time I decide I'm going to miss the World Cup final because I do believe that's our night to go. That's our best chance. And we kind of tried to talk them out of it because we wanted to prep a little bit better. We wanted to get our gear in order. We were trying to push it for a couple of days, and he said, "No, absolutely not. This is a night. I know it. I feel it in my guts. We're going then." And we followed his lead, and he was right. That's how they were able to bypass the most narrow passage to get into Merdeka. So his intuition was correct, which is, according to Angel, it always is. He always knows when to go, and he always knows when to leave.
Yeah, it's so fascinating watching this movie to learn how much planning goes into it. Like, I had no idea that they get into really studying the building and security and what's going on and the weather. I mean, there's so much there. I know we don't have too much time, so I was just wondering. You mentioned multiple times that this is a love story, so I was wondering if either of you or both of you could just tell me one last time, in what ways the making of this film influenced your own perspective about trust and relationships?
And there's a metaphor that Angela uses about the circus, where the trapeze artists call each other the flyer and the catcher, and the flyer guides them into the skies, and the catcher brings them back down to earth. And for most of the process of this 6+ year film, I was pretty sure that I knew who the flyer in their relationship was and who the catcher was. And it wasn't until the climactic mission where those roles swapped multiple times and the theme of the movie evolved from, just every relationship needs its balance to actually every person in a relationship needs to play both roles sometimes. When the partner loses hope, you need to be the leader and vice versa. Sometimes you need to be the star and the other person needs to be the rock, and those roles sometimes need to reverse. And it's only through Angela stepping into the opposite role on their final climb that they're able to succeed. And had they stayed with their roles that initially they had gotten used to and stayed in their comfort zones there, they wouldn't have succeeded in their final mission. And so it becomes a metaphor for romance.
Well, Maria, Jeff, I want to thank the two of you. We've been speaking with Jeff and Maria, the directors of Skywalkers, A Love Story. The film is playing on Friday, July 5th at 7 p.m. at Guildhall in East Hampton. And I had no idea going into this documentary how profound, thoughtful, engaging it was. I knew it was going to be fun and suspenseful, but I had no idea what a deep film it was. And
Thank you, Tom. We appreciate that.
yeah, I mean it's really a special film, so I want to highly recommend that everybody go and check out Skywalker's A Love Story. I think it's my favorite documentary of the year. Thank you so much for both
Thank
of
you.
you.
Oh my gosh, that's so great to hear. Thank you so much.
All right, guys, take it easy.
Right.